Hello, how are
Hi.
you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm kind of reassured that you didn't preface this as a debate because that's not what I came on for at all.
No, I did not think that was the direction this was going.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know we had anything to disagree on, actually. I was interested in some of your experiences.
Yeah, I kind of do expect I'll get some shit either from you or from chat for having worked for Russian media, but yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes, I guess.
Given the circumstances, I think it's far more important we recognize, how all of that ended. Could you tell us, to the extent you're comfortable, who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, I'm just gonna leave my name out of it just for deniability purposes. It's probably just I don't want to like be calculating every single one of my words during the conversation, so it probably wouldn't be rocket science for anyone who interacted with me at the company to figure out who I was. But yeah, let's keep it plausible deniety and just say hi, anonymous here, and I go by he him.
Gotcha. That works for us. So why are you here?
Yeah, so I'm now thankfully a former employee at a news agency called Ruppli, based in Berlin, which belongs to RT. And yeah, I was kind of hoping to like share my perspective on yeah, just generally why people like how and why people end up working for Russian media, and why this was kind of like why I didn't leave earlier, why I left with what happened in the last month. And yeah, no, I've been seeing a lot of tweets of people kind of saying, "Oh, these people like sold their soul for money," or a bunch of other more dumber shit than that. And I kind of wanted to discuss it. You know, like I think you at some point said something like, "Oh yeah, people who work for Russian media should be." I think it was specifically that RT employees should be executed or something, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." I mean,
Okay.
it's you. I kind of expect you to be bombastic, so I didn't take that personally. But I was like, okay, maybe it would be a good idea to like add some nuance to that.
Well, you're not an RT employee. You're an RT subsidiary employee.
Yeah,
So, and with that technicality aside, my actual impression, in all seriousness, is that for these media organizations, people at the top, and probably some of the more powerful pundits, are like full on true believers who are just unashamed ideological mouthpieces for Kremlin. Just anything that Putin once put out, they are there for it, and they'll do anything to meet those goals. But I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people who work for RT and their subsidiary networks are probably people who want an alternative narrative presented. They probably are bothered by Western centric media presentations in the countries that they work in. They probably feel as though there's not enough pushback or enough of an internationalist perspective, and they get sort of roped in sometimes into positions they don't necessarily fully agree with, but because they're adjacent to what feels like a broader counter narrative. And through that, then they become that's kind of like the plausible deniability element. And then from there, they're able to be a mouthpiece, I guess, very selectively.
yeah. I mean, that's pretty consistent with my experience of it. Not necessarily my case exactly, but consistent with many of the people that I worked with. But we weren't. Again, we were a subsidiary of RT, so not exactly like our the type of content that we published was not at all as narrativized as RT, and it was way more neutral. So I think it attracted people who weren't necessarily as disgruntled against Russian media. It was pretty fairly like liberal-minded journalists who just needed a job, and this is the offer that they got.
Mhm. Yeah, and
But
I
when it
know
comes to the people at the top, yeah, definitely. I'll have some stories about that. But
I
yeah,
know it's a very competitive field as well. Getting
yeah,
if you get
yeah.
a
I mean,
degree in
it's
journalism, I know it can be rough. So probably there
and
is
if
some
you
degree
don't
of
have a degree in journalism, it's even worse, man.
that's true.
um, and yeah, no, it's basically a coconut island situation, just to make the analogy work.
Is it not always? Um yeah, I would like to hear. How did you get into well, not your field, but like specifically what got you into working with them?
Yeah, so Basically, in my case, yeah, it was as close to Coconut Island as you can get within the, without going to a deserted island, I guess.
Hmm.
Like I was working for another company, completely unrelated, that was like a horrible company, and that was also going bankrupt. So I hadn't been paid in like 3 months. So my savings had completely evaporated, what little savings I had, and yeah, I was just like, I need a job now. Like I need something that something to come into my bank account by the end of the month if I want to be able to pay rent, you know. So I just applied literally everywhere for 3 months, and that was the only offer I got. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not comfortable with it being not an RT subsidiary, but I guess I'll go and stay there for 6 months. And if it's as bad as I'm afraid of, I'll just resign as soon as possible. And that was 4 years ago, because it wasn't as bad as I feared. But yeah, I'll get into that. But it was basically like I literally can't say no to anything at this point.
Well, there is that naturally exploitative element to a lot of bad work out there, right? I mean, whether you're looking at I mean, you even see this stuff in like the really, really, really bad fields, like US intelligence work, for example. Where
You'd
like
know something about that, wouldn't you?
oh yeah, absolutely. But I've gotten emails from people, legitimately. I've gotten emails from people who have gotten invites to work for the FBI. Not a joke. And usually when people email me about stuff like that, they're very apologetic from the front of it because I mean, for fairly obvious reasons. But there's always this underlying element of desperation. Now, I personally don't care at all. I think the idea of a leftist who watches me working for the feds is hilarious. So I'm all on board. More colleagues for me, right? But from their perspective, like there's this level of desperation, and I can tell, like in their mind, like if they had other choices, they would probably turn these down. But I mean, a lot of these people have student debt to pay off, and I imagine the feds are going to pay a lot better than like working a line cook job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised that that's that. I would have assumed that the feds or like the CIA or whatever, uh, kind of get a bunch of applications of the type of profiles that they would want. I'm kind of surprised that they would like that someone who's desperate for a job would actually be considered for them. But yeah, okay.
It's different levels of clearance. I think a lot of it is also who you know, or if you had like connections in uni that might have got you like an intel work, like they approach you, or there are like job fairs where they clear you for another job fair, and then you learn more, and stuff like that. It's all rabbit hole stuff. The only point I'm making is that I feel like as a product of the way our society is built, there is like a lot of implicit coercion at basically every level, everywhere. And I think it's something people should take into account.
Yeah, fair enough. I was so you mentioned earlier before I came on that you had another guest in like 4 hours. Do you have someone sooner than that? Like, should I be worried about going on tangents, or
No,
can I
you
just
shouldn't
like
be.
comfortably?
Though
Okay, cool.
historically, if videos go past like 90 minutes, people tend not to watch to the end, but that's more of a logistical concern for the channel. You don't need
Yeah,
to worry.
okay. No worries then. Yeah, so no, it was actually funny. My recruitment process was kind of funny because during my interview, they asked me, which I think they do for every applicant, do you know who we are? Like, do you know who we're affiliated with? And so this was 2018. So after the Crimea thing, but like at that point, things were pretty quiet on the Russia front. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I used to watch RT before the Crimea thing. And at the time, it was pretty much what you described earlier. It was like I liked, like I was getting into journalism, and I just wanted a diversity of views. So I would watch like Western media, like New York Times, BBC, whatever. And then I would watch RT, and I would think, okay, this is actually pretty good. This is uh, definitely a different perspective. But at the time, until the Ukraine stuff, I thought it was respectable. Just like Al Jazeera, I think does a lot of really really good work. They have some blind spots, and I thought the same thing at RT. And for whatever reason, I kind of stopped watching for a bit, and then I heard, oh, there's like this war happening in this revolution in Ukraine, and they're annexing a part of the country and whatever. And I was like, oh, I wonder, like that's the Western narrative. I wonder what RT is saying about this. And I turned RT on. It was like a parallel universe, man. I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Like CIA-backed neo-Nazis organizing a coup? Like, what is this thing? And at the time there were a bunch of resignations, like famously like Abby Martin and I don't remember that Liz Wall was it who ended up working at Fox News after that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was like I don't think RT ever got its a reputation back after that because they just went through the looking glass and went into like crazy territory.
I wasn't very politically active back then. But from what I've heard, back before the annexation of Crimea, RT and a lot of that aligned media was a lot more palatable because there wasn't a very hard like break from reality they had to reinforce through propaganda. It was just more of a passive defense of anti-American perspectives. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously with the Georgia thing, of course, but I don't think that resonated as much with the West as the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah, I don't think I was politically involved enough. I don't remember exactly when Georgia was. I know it was a few years before Crimea. I think I started watching in between the two. But yeah, no, it's funny because it kind of echoes also what happened at Rupley. Like there wasn't that much of a pushback against Western or US narratives while I worked there until there was actually something to push back on, which was the Ukraine invasion, which is, you know, when it ended up being a breaking point for pretty much every one of my colleagues and myself. So yeah, anyway, they asked me about that, and I say, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of RT, but you know, I'm curious what it's like from the inside. And they say, no, 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 don't worry. Uh, we're not RT. Like we don't push the same narrative as them. We just want you to know that we have some affiliation there, but like you don't need to worry about the about like a pro-Russian agenda. We're much more objective than they are. And so I was like, don't know how much I believe that, but I'll give it a try. And if I need to leave, you know, in a few months, then I'll do that. At least I have enough to buy food for the next few months was the logic there. So yeah, that's how I ended up working there. And once I got there, it was like, okay, this feels like a normal newsroom. You know, these are normal people. It's like there was some things here and there that I'll get into about, you know, the in the day-to-day work of like weird rules that we had to follow in terms of words that we could and couldn't use. But I think that's fairly standard.
That's
You
probably
know, every
standard policy. Yeah.
yeah, every news agency, every publication has a style guide that says, oh, like I don't know, we use British English, we use the Oxford comma, we use I think the AP style guide a few years ago, I looked at it and said, oh, we use American Indian instead of Native American or whatever, and I was like, oh, that's surprising, you know. And some of the restrictions at Rupley were like, oh, we do not use the word terrorism ever, even referring to ISIS or anything like that. I'm just like, okay. I remember a conversation with an editor of mine there, and he says that, and I'm like, I mean, even in super extreme cases where they're like attacking civilians, and they were like, well, the U.S. attacks civilians. Do you want to call them terrorists? I was like, well, actually, you may have a point there. Okay, let's not use terrorism.
Right. So
And
that
yeah,
is a consistent strategy, isn't it? Right? Where
yeah, yeah,
the framing, it's like a kind of implied whataboutism where they'll go easier on political elements they agree with by vaguely invoking, you know, a perceived double standard that they would then be engaging in with regards to other groups they don't like as much. But then if you look at it a little closer, it seems more like they're obfuscating or it's a selective policy that they engage in.
yeah. It's like a lot of it really felt like over like a neutrality pushed to the extreme. Like some of the stuff that made me really uncomfortable was stories like any story about Syria, like specifically Syria, and there were a couple of other countries, Libya, Yemen, needed management approval before they could go out. And basically, what we would do in those cases would just like write the simplest, most milquetoast script you can you can like imagine. Like
Hmm.
no one should get offended by this. Even ISIS should read this and go, yeah, okay, that's fair. It's never like this person attacked this person. Oh, it's always like there was an attack. Like never attribute anything to anyone. Always cite like you're like it's always like alleged and reported and all of that. So it was like never
Very
taking a
milk
side. But then
toast.
like super milquetoast. But like again, like that didn't it didn't feel that extreme because like for example, like I was looking at the New York Times headline on that Will Smith slap from last night.
Hmm.
And I think their headline was Will Smith appears to slap Chris Rock. And I'm like, dude, that was a slap. But
Very, very,
they
very
have to like
careful
put the
with the
appears.
litigation.
Yes. And it that's kind of how I felt on any touchy subject that could be um and that could enter into okay, we don't want to contradict Russian policy. It was never like pushing Russia's narrative. It was just like let's be extra neutral on this, which it like that was to me that in a lot of cases that was like getting closer to the line where I was getting uncomfortable, but it wasn't bad enough for me to actually go, okay, I'm going to resign over this because I don't like to be neutral about this, because if you don't like to be neutral about stuff, you like can't really work in journalism at all in general.
Of course. I'd like to try something, if I may. There's a light buzzing noise in your background.
Yeah,
I
I
think it's a
think I know
laptop
what that
fan.
is.
Um,
Yeah, that's probably the case. Yeah.
Gotcha. Are you using the application or the web page version of Discord?
No, I'm on the app. It's just that I have a small desk, so my mic is close to my laptop.
Gotcha. Do you have the I believe it's called the crisp noise suppression active for the call?
Is that by default in the system or?
On the bottom left of the app window, there should be a series of vertical lines, looking kind of like a sound wave, right next to the voice connected green text, and you'll be able to turn it on there.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to know.
Noise suppression. Okay, crisp. Yeah, it's powered on theoretically.
Gotcha. Theoretically, just one moment. Just a
How
moment.
bad is the noise? I can just try
It's
to get
not
my
bad.
laptop a little
Nobody in
louder.
chat is
Okay.
complaining. This is me being autistic.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, no worries.
nice. Let's see, video. Oh, they changed how it looks in the background. Why do they do this all the time? Um, oh, they changed the other. Okay. I'll just have to deal with being autistic. It's genuinely not a big deal at all. Please don't
I'm
feel
sorry about
self-conscious
that.
about it. Anyway,
Okay.
please. Okay, so uh, with regards to their with regards to their styling and their consistency, um, you worked there for some time. You said 4 years.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious. Were you ever given any work to do specifically on the ongoing conflict in Ukraine? Were you ever tasked with anything pertaining to that specific issue?
Okay, so the way it works is usually any work that has to do directly with Russia or let's say like generally the former USSR countries was done by the Moscow office. And depending on what level you're at, so I was a broadcast journalist.
Interesting. That is
Yeah.
very interesting.
But yeah, but it's a bit more nuanced than what it sounds at first, because like they would publish whatever they wanted to publish in Russian, which we had no control over whatsoever. But we, as a broadcast journalist, you just see what goes up on the website in those cases. But once you become an editor, you actually receive translations of their Russian scripts, and they say, "Oh, please publish this," and you have to kind of basically rewrite the entire script because it's garbage, and you
Mhm.
have to write something that makes sense and that fits, English standards and like international media standards for what you can publish. So it usually when it was political stuff or when it when we would get hard Russian propaganda vibes from the scripts we would get from the Moscow office, we would tone that shit all the way down and just make it as fair as possible and as non-Russian propaganda as possible.
Mhm.
That got more extreme towards the end. Once the Ukraine stuff started happening, that the efforts that we made to remove the pro-Russian bias got kind of got pushed up to 11. Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, that is very, very, very interesting to me. The idea that more leeway would be afforded to journalistic affairs, which aren't specifically about like USSR or former USSR issues, but then to that it would go to the Moscow office. Because one
It
of the
was more of a
things,
language thing, to be honest. It was more of a
Mhm.
language thing. Like we had an Arabic desk that would do a bunch of the packages that came from the Middle East. We had a Spanish desk that did a lot of the packages from Latin America and from Spain. It was more a matter of, well, it makes more sense for them to work. Like we can't cut a quote in Russian. You know, if there's an interview in Russian, just can't cut it. So they cut it, they publish it in Russian, and then they send us the English version that we have to work with. But the word, like the video editing is already done, the translation's already done. You know, it's something that we couldn't have done from the
Gotcha.
start.
And that does, of course, afford them a greater degree of regional control because I
Definitely.
imagine those Moscow offices are towing a pretty narrow line when it comes to the issues they're given to discuss. Um,
Yeah.
and
So sorry, go ahead.
well, I just want to say that one of the things that has made RT really effective as a propaganda network is that there's so much diversity of opinion in the work they produce. So this is before the invasion of Ukraine. If you would go on RT, like the YouTube channel, you would see this incredible diversity of political opinions. You would see stuff that looked like far right nationalism. You would see stuff that looks like far left populism. You would see advocacies for Bernie Sanders. You would see both attacks on and defenses for Donald Trump. You would see like this massive, massive, massive range. And I think a big part of this isn't just a kind of destabilization mantra, but is also a product of an effort to encourage ideological diversity as long as it doesn't get in the way of very specific geopolitical issues that the Kremlin wants a consistent line on. So they'll encourage diversity on a bunch of issues in America, but they don't want people, publishing articles on how the Russian-backed separatists in the Donbas region of Ukraine are a violation of Ukraine's national sovereignty on the part of Russia. Like, they wouldn't encourage that diversity on those issues.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's several things I want to bounce on in there. First of all, like what you said about the pushing kind of a destabilization narrative. I think that's obviously that's been Russia's strategy for a while now. It's like when Trump was elected and people said, oh, that he had help from Russia, and a lot of people pushed back saying that's ridiculous. He's not a Russian agent. It's like, no, he doesn't need to be a Russian agent for them to push his election because they knew it would be like a massive clusterfuck, which it was. And I think they got exactly what they bargained for, which was to massively destabilize the country, even if they didn't like control him like a puppet, like some people said was supposedly the conspiracy theory. Like I never believed that he was under Moscow's control. I just believed that they pushed his candidacy to create chaos, basically. And I think that's also what they do in their media. It's always like, so we didn't have any common staff with RT Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have no idea how it worked inside RT Germany, other than one former RT employee who a couple of years ago was interviewed in German media saying, yeah, everyone at RT Germany is either a neo-Nazi, like or a nationalist, or they're just Russian ideologues, and there's no one else there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And and communists, but basically there was no one in the center, like nowhere near the center. Is all like tankies, neo Nazis, and Russian ideologues, basically.
And in a respect, I think this is one of the reasons we argue Russia has such a sophisticated propaganda network. It's that, for the most part, and I think that this war in Ukraine is an exception, for the most part, it doesn't ever seem like the products of their propaganda networks are pushing a consistent narrative. It seems like it's this organic, diverse, disconnected, just jumble of perspectives, which are an authentic product of the unique idiosyncrasies and values of all the individuals who make up, those arguments. Even when they were with the Russiagate stuff, when they interfered with our election, it's not as though it was like it wasn't as simple as them just like secretly pumping a bunch of money into the Trump campaign, right? Like there were Russian companies that were like making fake social media posts promoting BLM too. That uncertainty, the
Oh yeah,
discourse,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it just anywhere and everywhere. And I don't think, for the most part, this is something that the United States has historically engaged in, even when we were doing our seedier, like Latin America CIA bullshit. Um, I feel like for the most part, we've always taken kind of I guess I would say a relatively direct approach in terms of our foreign policy. And Russia has always favored an indirect approach, which seems to be much more effective and gives you more plausible deniability in the modern world with social media where anyone can say anything from anywhere with no accountability.
Oh yeah, I mean definitely. Like the social media is definitely allowing them to stretch their disinformation budget for sure. What was I gonna say? Shit. I
Only
wanted to
you
bounce
can tell
something
me
you said,
that.
and I wanted to bounce something you said, and I kind of got sidetracked. Um, let's see.
I can
Where was
advance the
I?
next question if you like.
Sure, go ahead.
So, time passed. It was better working there than you were worried it would be.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I want to know, okay? It's late 2021, and reports are being heard that Russian military training exercises are amassing tens of thousands of troops at the Ukrainian border. Before people are even talking about a full on invasion, I mean, people are concerned. Was there a change in tone at your office?
At my office, between colleagues, yeah, definitely. No one that I know of, like over the course of the 4 years that I was there, every time we would talk between colleagues, it would always be like, "Oh, how'd you end up here? How did you end up in such a shitty place as this? Like, how do you feel about working for the Kremlin, basically?" And they would be like, "Yeah, I'm really uncomfortable with where my salary is coming from, but hey, the day-to-day work of just which by the way, do I need to explain actually what the company did, or is that clear when I say like news agency or?
Oh, no, I would very much appreciate clarification.
Okay, so roughly, the way I was explained actually super recently, I didn't realize that we were as integral to RT's operation as it turns out that we were. But according to another person who resigned, who was higher up than me, the way she described it was that Rupley is the production arm of RT. Basically, we do all the B-roll and some of the quotes that RT reporters use in their news packages when they have a talking head. Basically, I didn't realize it was that much, but basically, what we publish on the website is just news packages that has only B-roll and interviewees like short quotes covering uh, like mostly political news, but yeah, news from literally all over the world. I think anyone, if you're like a regular consumer of news, whether it's your 8 p.m. broadcast or whatever, you've definitely seen Rupley footage on a regular basis. If you've seen footage of Julian Assange being dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, that was
Mm-hmm.
Rupley.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough, we had like the company had no insider knowledge. It was just like for a year, every couple of months there would be rumors that, oh, the Ecuadorians want to give him up. They're sick of of having him there, and the police are going to show up. And they would go, they would film, they would be like AP, Reuters, Rupley, and other people, and nothing would happen. Would happen, and then then same rumors would come back a couple of months later. We would like send the camera people again, and that time Reuters were gone, AP were gone, everyone was gone, and we were just like, how long are we going to stay? Okay, let's give it another couple of days and then we'll leave. And it turned out that in that time he was arrested. But yeah, that was if you've seen footage of that, it was Repley footage. And so yeah, basically to come back to your question, I was hoping not to stay too long, even though I did stay longer than a few months. I was hoping to, yeah, okay, let's just, save a bit of money, maybe buy some new equipment so I can freelance after this and
Mm-hmm.
not stay long enough that it's going to be too much of a stain on my resume. So by the end of 2019, I was starting to think, okay, I'll give myself like another year here to like really like uh get some things in order, and then I'll be ready to leave. And then like COVID happened, and like a bunch of media companies around the world were laying off their journalists because they didn't know like how much they could afford. And I was like, okay, maybe not the best time to resign
Hmm.
to change jobs. So I decided to stay until the pandemic was over. And late 2021, I was like, okay, now it's time to leave. So I started to talk to my boss, asking like where, like what they could offer if I like, if like as the next position for me. I was kind of hoping to get a position on the field. She floated a I probably shouldn't talk about this, just so I'm not too easily
Of
identifiable.
course,
But basically, yeah,
exercise all due caution.
yeah, they floated a pretty good position on the field that I thought that would probably be a better place for me to find another job than to be stuck in the newsroom. Like I would probably get better job offers from there than from here. So I was like, okay, this is gonna take a few months. In the meantime, this military buildup is happening. What I was hoping, and I think this was pretty general, like no one obviously knew, like we don't have direct line to whatever's happening in Moscow, but what we were hoping was that this whole buildup would kind of be a massive troll that
Ah,
they were,
an epic gamer move, as it's known.
yeah, because obviously the US was pushing this whole like, oh, Russia's about to invade. Look, this is definitely going to happen. They're going to do it by the end of the week, and then nothing would happen. And then they would do it in the next couple of days, and then nothing would happen. And I was kind of expecting, I'm kind of hoping, despite my best intuition, kind of hoping that the timeline for them to cross the frozen rivers would pass and nothing would happen, and they would go, see, it was all fear mongering. The US is just completely not credible on this issue. And that's what we were all kind of, crossing our fingers for. And then when they started to evacuate people from the Donbass region, and when the whole bombing of the Donbass leader's car happened, that was like, oh shit, it's happening. And oh shit, I'm out of time to leave the company now.
Yeah, I have to say, when the buildup took place on the border to begin with, like at the very beginning, I also didn't think it would amount to anything because Russia has always fronted their aggression very openly, um, to try to like win over their neighbors. It was only when like they started doing the joint exercises in Belarus and like they started like getting more and more troops over there, and then it wasn't just troops, it was also like military equipment, like vehicles, and like, oh, they're bringing like rocket artillery over. It's like, oh god, like what are you training the rocket artillery on the border? What? Yeah, the blood packs they were bringing over, the field hospitals. It was like, okay, the bridge laying equipment. It's like, all right, okay. Yeah, obviously with regards to like Russian, I mean that's kind of the point, right? Like again, like America doesn't do this. When America wants to invade a country or when they want to do something, I feel like we're relatively blunt about it, right? Like with the Iraq war, for example, it's not as though like there was this, you know, oh, we're not invading Iraq. We're actually just like deploying a special operations group to the coast, and we're going to use it to help this one particular group of disaffected refugees who have been harmed by the, Saddam Hussein and his regime. And then like, oh, defensively, we have to move. We were like, no, actually, we're bringing them democracy. Let's go. Let's liberate Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we just sent our entire military over there. It's fairly blunt. Um, and I feel like it's just really difficult to parse the. I mean, Russia has spent so much time and so much money essentially gaslighting the whole world as to their
That's
actual.
exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, like, like, will they, won't they? Well, they'll spend 6 months like making it seem like they're going to do something really bad, but then they don't. It's like, oh, haha, you're crazy for thinking we were going to do that. It's um and obviously their media apparatuses are the way through which they do this. So you resigned when this started to ramp up. How did your in your conversations with your coworkers and the attitude of the place you were working at, like, did you get the feeling that there was like a change in the, I guess, company culture? Like you were all being sort of ramped up for a more direct propagandistic engagement?
Oh yeah, no, I haven't even gotten there yet. No, we'll get there. Yeah, you're
Oh,
jumping
please.
a few steps here.
Oh, please don't let me.
Yeah, no,
Don't let me. Yeah.
I wanted to bounce on the gaslighting thing because that's really the feeling that I get from anything. Like you were saying earlier in your Ukraine coverage, you were talking about how Russia lies about literally everything, and that's exactly it. Like every single time you see like a public denial or like Russia's accused of helping Syria with their chemical attacks or whatever, and they're always like, no, of course not, like we have nothing to do with that, and you kind of like imagine them chuckling behind their hand or something.
Right. Right.
And it's always like it's like the most extreme example I think was the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Which yeah, we have like I wanted to touch on that anyway in terms of like our coverage at Rupley. But the idea that they have this one nerve agent that is only made in Russia, that is traceable to Russia, and they would use that to poison people and then deny that it was them is insane.
It happened again pretty
And
recently. According to Bellingcat, 3 people at a recent peace talk between Ukraine and Russia have developed symptoms of chemical poisoning. This was just
oh
like
shit,
less than 24 hours ago.
oh shit, I need to be careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
know.
never, ever,
I'm
ever accept a drink from a Russian diplomat under any
Yeah, I don't think I should
circumstances.
even touch my door handle or anything like that. But no,
We're an N95.
Yeah,
Anytime you're in the vicinity.
like yeah, what's it called? Hazmat suit.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like I heard a bunch of people, even like pro-Russian people, who were like, no, it's too obvious. They wouldn't use Novichok to poison people because it's too obvious that it's them. No, that's the point. They want to send a message and also gaslight everyone by saying, no, of course it wasn't us. Like the thing that literally has our signature. Like it was to me that was the point, was to kind of do the denial with their signature on the crime at the same time. That's the absolutely insane part of it.
Because you
But
want
yeah,
to
no.
train people to deny the obvious, right? One of the this is I think this is the difference between like an expert and an amateur liar. An amateur liar will construct like a perfect and consistent narrative, or at least they'll try to. But an expert liar will be dog shit at it 100 times over until they've trained everyone to either accept obvious inconsistencies with their narrative or to not even know what the truth is. It's like that Hitler quote, right? Like people will believe great lies more easily than little ones. You don't just want people to believe some carefully crafted narrative. You want people to be basically immune to reality. And I think that Russia's pretty good at that in terms of
Mhm.
motivating that,
Yeah, I can't remember what the quote exactly, but there was this one quote, like the difference between a liar and a bullshitter, and it's basically that. Yeah, it's like a bullshitter doesn't care about if you believe him or not. He just will stick by his guns and maintain his completely inconsistent narrative and not give a shit. But yeah, no, the Navalny stuff was kind of a good example of stuff that we covered while I was there that didn't feel like that was the kind of stuff where I was like, okay, this could have been a lot worse. Like for context, like my one of my first jobs as a journalist, I was covering like local politics, and I would go interview some mayor and come back and start writing on the working on the article, and tell my editor, hey, this dude just straight up lied to me, and she would take me and say, you can never say lie in an article. Like you can't accuse him of lying. You're not in his head. You don't know what he knows. You don't know what he thinks. You just can never use that word. What you can do is like you quote him. You say this is what he said, and then you quote opposing evidence. You cite your sources, and you lead the reader to come to the same conclusion as you, that he lied. So you know he lied. I know he lied. The reader knows he's lied. He lied, but you never said say the word lied.
Mhm.
And that's basically how we would treat those, either the Navalny poisoning, the MH17 stuff, or just generally the stories that needed management approval. Was like, yeah, we're just gonna be super neutral, but we can still in the way we write articles. And this was a fairly like explicit concerted effort from newsroom level people to kind of have something that's unimpeachable for editorial reasons by the management at the top, that they can't say, oh yeah, you used like the wrong word here, that seems biased. Like it's incredibly unbiased, but still kind of tries to lead people towards the right conclusion. And so in the case of Navalny, we were able to say, oh, this guy is a critic of Putin's government. He, quote unquote, fell ill and went into a coma on a flight in between two cities in Russia.
Right.
He was transferred to a German hospital where the government tested, like the hospital tested him, and the government said that he tested positive for Novichok. But the Russian government denies any involvement, and the hospital where he was initially treated in Russia says that they don't think it was a poisoning. But like 70% of that script would be like laying out the evidence for why it's obvious that he was poisoned, and then the bullshit denial at the end is kind of like, well, we need to add this for balance.
Right. It's well,
And
yeah. It's an implicit denial as well. Like
yeah,
if you were to like if you were to assess the situation rationally, like obviously in a country like Russia, if they had poisoned him, any Russian hospital will deny that he'd been poisoned
yeah,
because they also don't want to get poisoned. Like it's yeah, like so if you think about it for a second, like the input of that hospital is irrelevant to the case. You would want an
yeah.
independent analysis, but you know, they in a way which makes it seem as though they're trying to sort of rationally balance it out, provide all perspectives. They actually tip the scales in favor of their argument.
Yeah, and it was funny because there was a moment of kind of you know that meme of people like the monkey looking aside, like there was kind of that feeling when up until the Russian government announced that the test results pointed towards Novichok, we were using like it was the alleged poisoning of Alexei Navalny. He was
Mhm.
allegedly poisoned and this and that, you know. And then the press release by the German government came out saying, "Oh, this was definitely Novichok." And I remember this was the end of my shift, and the head of our department came out of her office and said, "Okay, we can drop allegedly. The German government said it's a poisoning now." So I'm like, "Oh, cool. We're actually doing the right thing here." So I leave the office. I come back the next day for my next shift, and I bump into a colleague of mine who's leaving her shift, and she's like, "Oh, by the way, allegedly is back. We have to keep using allegedly."
Nice. Do you know if that was like a quick correction from the Moscow office afterwards? Like they were like, no, 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 you're still using that, or was that like? Do you know what the chain of command was on that retraction?
I don't know specifically, but I'm reasonably certain. I don't think it was the Moscow office because the Moscow office, in terms of like the newsroom people in Moscow, were at the same level of us. Like the people who would tell that department had what to do
Mhm.
would be the people like the heads of. They were both in charge of RT Germany and Ruppli, and yeah, they were full on Russian ideologues. That like that came out very clearly during a meeting that we had after the invasion started. But yeah, like, there was another case that I think was interesting because I almost resigned over it. Actually, there were two things that nearly got me to leave. One of them was an email that we got one day during. You remember the Hong Kong protest from a couple of years ago? This
Mhm.
was pre-COVID,
Yeah,
or maybe it was like early in COVID or something. I don't remember.
it was pre-COVID.
Um,
I know
yeah,
that time doesn't mean anything anymore, but that was
yeah.
pre-COVID.
I know we were all still in the newsroom. It was pre-lockdowns for sure. It must have been pre-COVID, yeah. But anyway, we get an email one day saying, "Oh, we've been doing really good covering the violence of the police against the protesters, but hey, we wanted to focus our coverage on protesters being violent against police."
Of
And he
course.
sent us like a couple of examples of the style, the type of scripts that he would like us to publish, and I was like, what the like I if this is like political pressure making us support the Chinese government, I will have to resign over this. I can't stay here. And so I decided, okay, I'll go talk to him because like the guy who sent that email is I have like I have full faith in, like he's a good journalist, and he was super, super honest and straightforward about everything that happened there.
Huh.
And so I figured, okay, if I talk to him and he tells me, yeah, look, I'm just a messenger, this is what they told me to say, then at least I'll know what's up, and I'll have a reason to resign, but I'll see what the explanation is. And so I go to him and I say, hey, uh, is this for political reasons? And he would go like, oh shit, I didn't realize it wouldn't be read that way. No, no, it was completely a business decision. Like, we do not want to paint all protesters as violence against the police. Like, we'll still continue doing the coverage that we did of the protest movement as a whole. Like, the only restriction that we had in covering those was that we couldn't refer to them as pro-democracy. We thought that was too biased. We had to refer to them as anti-government protesters, which, yeah, doesn't seem less biased, but okay, whatever.
Huh.
Uh, Tomato, tomato. But yeah, he was saying, no, no, look, what happened is everyone is covering the same story as we are of the police violence against this massive protest movement, and there's a niche of reporting of real stories of like violent protester groups, like smaller groups within the protest movements, that is undercovered, and we've put out a few packages about that, and they did really, really well. So just purely as a business decision, we decided that those would probably do well if we did a few more, and get more, we would sell more packages that way. And I was like, okay, I can imagine that conversation happening anywhere else, so I can't say I'm going to resign out of principle over
And that's the
this.
plausible
If,
deniability
yeah,
right there, right?
yeah. In this case, just because of who it came from, I do believe it, but maybe that's also what he was told as a justification as well. Again,
It's
it
hard
was
to tell.
convenient for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always going to be hard to tell, right? The most effective way to advocate for positions which are incredibly untenable, like publicly, is to not actually support them, but rather to support them by implication, by giving undue coverage to issues that don't deserve it. So, for example, we saw this perfectly with Fox News during Black Lives Matter. The
Oh
obvious
yeah.
explicit position that Fox News had, the one they directly stated, was that rioting and looting is bad, which is a pretty defensible position that most people in America would agree with. Obviously, though, their undue coverage, their insistent fixation on it, to the detriment of the broader protests, was an effort to push their real position, which is that they fucking hate black people. Um, and we see this all the time, and we see this all the time even from more reputable news agencies. Undue coverage, like fixating on one element over another, is an inevitable product of having biases, which is also an inevitable product of being alive in the world. There's no real way to
Yeah.
avoid that. But I think there's a big difference between natural biases, which naturally guide what you cover, and very politically directed biases that cause you to sort of specifically craft a narrative around a given issue. If that's actually happened here, it's impossible to know, but it definitely is convenient. China and Russia are, of course, geopolitical allies for the most part.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also just a product of journalism in general. Like, we like individual stories. We there's not really, like, the big picture stuff is for the history books. It's not for journalism. That's not what journalism does. And like, if anything, the more long form the journalism, the more in depth it goes, the more specific it goes onto like specific characters. When you're just talking about, when you're just doing like quick news packages, you're going to talk about an entire protest movement. If you want to go more in depth, you're going to talk about this one specific group. If you're going to do like a magazine feature, you're going to talk about this one specific person, and we kind of it's kind of a product of the medium of trying to be engaging by making it personal, I guess. Um, but yeah, I remember a conversation that I had with the same boss from one of my first jobs, the one who told me you never say lies. It was about just being like media bias, and she would maintain that the company I worked for wasn't biased. Like, oh yeah, we do not have a bias. We're always going to be objective and like present both sides of the issues.
That's
And
always a
I'd be
red
like,
flag to me.
yeah, yeah, totally. And I
Anything, any
think
institution, any person who won't admit to bias just means that they're either lying about it or they aren't smart enough to know it.
yeah, I think it was like a lack of awareness, because I was pointing out, like, there's even if you want to cover like every issue like super in depth and present as much the both sides as you can or whatever. It's like sometimes there's not two sides to a story, and sometimes like the other side is complete bullshit, and you can disprove that when you present it. But also just like you do not have infinite resources to cover everything. So just with like even if your coverage of specific issues is perfect, just the choices you make and what you choose to cover is a bias that you have. It's like, oh no, it's just we cover what's of public interest. Yeah, public interest to who? If you were black, if you were trans, you would probably have a very different interest in what stories you would like to cover than just, being a white woman in the south of whatever. Let's not go into geographics, but yeah. Um,
Yes, I
um,
agree.
but yeah, that's exactly the thing, and that's something that, at least from my department, I had literally zero control over what stories we chose to cover. That was coming from another department. They just sent us the footage, and we had to cut it and write it and do the best we could with what we were sent, basically.
Gotcha. So, did you you said you left. Obviously, being too specific here, you shouldn't be, but um did you leave before the full-on invasion or after it?
I left after it. So what happened
Mhm.
was, yeah, I remember you covering that the Donbass leader's car that was blown up, and allegedly, like, this is impossible to confirm, but apparently that wasn't really his car, and he has a much fancier car that they didn't want to blow up, so they just took a cheap Jeep and blew that thing up instead.
Yeah, it's very
Uh,
funny to imagine
yeah,
like look at this glorious victory. They're like, "Look, we destroyed the leaders." And like it's this I swear to God, that Jeep didn't even look like it could run. I mean, that would have been like in America, you couldn't sell that for any amount of money. That's like a
yeah.
scrapyard car right there. And they're like, "Yeah, here's the leader of this region." Yeah.
Yeah, no, like so we published that, and at the time it was obviously a really really busy news day for us. So we didn't even have time to question it when we saw it. At the time, I like the reporting of it not even being his real car came later. So I was just like, this feels like a false flag, but I don't have time to question. We just have to publish it. And I was starting to like, first of all, get a really bad feeling over what was about to happen. And to me, like from that point on, all the evacuation packages we were putting out and that Jeep, I didn't myself publish the RT journalists getting like some weird explosion in the background. I'm pretty sure that Rupley did publish that footage, though. I just remember seeing in my inbox a headline from the Moscow office about RT journalists coming under fire.
Huh.
And I was like, I'm not even going to dedicate any of my time to looking at what that was. And later I saw what was probably the same footage on your stream. And I was like, okay, that's hilarious. And that's really fucked up that we published it without asking any questions. But
Great
yeah, at
comedy
least I
though.
wasn't. Yeah, great comedy. But yeah, I was glad that I wasn't personally involved in that because for the most part, I can say that in my time there, I stand by pretty much everything that I hit publish on, minus a couple of exceptions, but over, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of files. I think that's not too bad.
Pretty
But
good.
yeah, so um, a couple of days later, I wake up in the morning and my girlfriend's telling me, okay, there's a war now. It's like, wasn't that already the case? And it took me the entire day basically to like kind of snap out of my like dazed confusion and actually realize there was a war. So for the first day of the actual invasion, it still felt like the previous days to me where they were still talking about sending a peacekeeping force into the Donbass region. Thankfully, like I was really worried that I would have to write peacekeeping force into my scripts, and thankfully I never had to do that.
Huh.
I would just refuse that and say no, it's Russian forces, period. Which I did for um, a few months earlier. Russia sent forces into Kazakhstan to like uh, get control over an anti-government protest, and in that case, I would get scripts from Moscow saying peacekeeping forces, and I would just like, remove the peacekeeping Russian forces instead.
Was
But
was
yeah, in this
that
case,
did you get in any heat for that?
No, one thing that was a source of discussion is that the script that I got, they never brought up the fact that I removed the peacekeeping part.
Hmm.
But at one point, they sent me a script that would mention the number of dead police, the number of injured civilians. But the main story that everyone else was reporting on was the number of dead civilians, and there was no mention of that in their script. And I was like, guys, what the fuck? Like, are you seriously gonna pretend this didn't happen? Like, are you seriously just gonna like not mention it and like, completely sail past that without saying anything? And so at that point, it was during a night shift. There was no one there to like reply to my comments. So I just added a paragraph in there about the reports of, and I gave a specific number of 100 and something.
Uh-huh.
And the next day, when the morning shift came in, I wasn't online anymore. I just checked the chats later, and they said, "Oh, you use this number quoted from this news agency, but there's a different number quoted from another one that's lower, like a lower estimate or whatever." And so they ended up with a compromise to say, okay, at least the lower number of reported dead civilians. But yeah, that was like very mild pushback. I
What was the
didn't
other
actually
agency?
get into. I don't remember the specifics. It was probably, I really couldn't remember. I would have to log into the chats and have a look, which I'm not going to spend time doing.
Fair. What was the attitude of some of your coworkers during that time? Was there like unease at the office as you all felt like you were being roped into something, or were some people like really on board and other people were more openly opposed?
No, like literally no one was on board. There was one person who would have been on board, like the one like really, really, really extreme tanky who used to work there. But by the time any of this happened, he had been fired for like threatening to do a Charlie Hebdo at the office because he didn't agree with some of the people who worked there.
Really?
Uh, I wouldn't have been
Interesting. Only the
surprised.
best.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had been on board with everything that was happening. But there was just one guy who was still working there who was like, no, we're just presenting the different perspective and whatever. And he was literally the only one. And a lot of people would like literally say, well, once we all resign, he's the guy who's going to be left at the company. Um, but yeah, so I work on my first shift post invasion. And at that point, a colleague of mine comes and says, "Oh, we're not allowed to use the word invasion." I'm like, "What do you mean we're not allowed to use the word invasion? What are we supposed to say then?" He says, "It's a special military operation." It's like that's just a massive euphemism for invasion. Like, what are you saying? Yeah, well, it's what we have to say. And I'm like, okay, I'm not using that. So I basically like I think the first script I wrote, I was like, okay, whatever, we can't use invasion, so military operation. And I felt super dirty after that one, so I was like, okay, I need to find a different word. And so I ended up using offensive, which I wasn't explicitly told not to use. And later I talked to my colleague, the one who told me we weren't allowed to use invasion, and he said, "Yeah, I've been using incursion or aggression. I don't remember." I
Huh.
was like, "Okay, well, at least we agreed not to use the word that they have been using."
Interesting.
And so what happened was the next morning, I kind of went for a walk. Like I woke up in a completely different state of mind than the previous day. I woke up kind of like it was finally dawning on me that there was massive war happening in in Europe. And like thanks in part to like just watching your streams of like literally hours of live footage from there because we just like get individual packages and we don't have time to like actually watch the individual like the big picture developments. We're just putting out stuff, file after file after file. So we
Uh-huh.
don't really have the overall view. So yeah, watching your stream was giving me kind of a more like it was kind of making everything feel more real. And so I go for a walk in Berlin, and I start talking to a colleague of mine on Telegram, and we're both like, they're saying we can't use invasion. They already in our system, like when we put out a file, we have a drop down menu with all the countries on Earth, and we have to choose which country the story happened on. They already had the day after the invasion started, they had country categories for Luhansk and Donetsk.
Right.
Or I should say Lugansk and Donetsk because Lugansk is the Russian spelling for Luhansk.
Ah, like
Um,
Kiev and Kiev. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So we'd been using Kiev with the E for the longest time, and I've never really questioned it because it's the spelling that I was used to before. But the Lugansk thing was weird because for years we had been using Luhansk, and all of a sudden they changed it like 2 months before the invasion when things were starting to ramp up. And I was like, okay, that's a bit of a weird decision there. And so yeah, immediately after the invasion started, we had new country categories for that, and we weren't supposed to refer to them as disputed territories. We are supposed to refer to them as independent countries now.
Huh.
And yeah, we were talking about that on Telegram. We were both like, yeah, this is super fucked up. I can't just stay here and just do what they're telling me to do. I have to stand by my principles. So we basically agreed that we weren't gonna listen to any of their guidelines. We were gonna use invasion. We were gonna use like the Ukrainian spellings for cities. We were gonna refer to Luhansk and Donetsk as disputed territories.
You cut out there. You were going to say disputed territories? Oh God, they got him. Not like this. Uh-oh. Uh, well, uh,
Hello, can you hear me?
hello. Welcome back.
Okay, nothing happened.
Good to
They didn't
know.
apartment.
Okay. The last thing that I heard was your insistence on using the correct terminology.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, we got every editor in our department on board with that. We had yeah, we just like everyone was on the same page immediately as soon as we talked to them, and we started doing that. So yeah, the next few shifts. So this was Friday, and management had told us, oh, we're gonna have an all staff meeting on Monday to discuss the situation because like everyone was freaked out, obviously. And so we were kind of like waiting to see what they were going to say during that meeting and see, if there was going to be any like big, yeah, okay, we're going to stay neutral in this one and we're not going to push Russian narratives or any kind of reassurance that that we wouldn't feel like instruments of Russian propaganda. So we were just not leaving yet, but over the weekend, everything we did was literally like go into the system, like when Moscow would publish a file in Russian under the independent country like Donetsk and Luhansk countries, and send it the script for that. I would like publish the script in English, changing the spellings and adding invasion, like using invasion and stuff, and then going into the system and changing the country to disputed territory instead. Ukraine in disputed territory. The other thing that I did that was kind of felt really satisfying because I hadn't really felt the freedom to do it before was a file of quotes by Putin, who was claiming that the Russian troops were not clashing with the military and were not affecting civilians at all. They were just having clashes with neo-Nazis and nationalists. And I basically added an entire paragraph saying that the claim of significant neo-Nazi presence in Ukraine had been a part of their justification for the invasion. Like, kind of, I don't remember the wording exactly, but I said that it was like largely unsubstantiated and exaggerated or something like that. And I was like, I would never have been able to use those words if I wasn't like basically hoping that they would fire me, which would make like leaving the company a lot easier than if I resigned.
Of course. Yeah. Well, thank you for your service and also for your principled behavior and not standing by and allowing yourself to be a mouthpiece for the propaganda. Um, I'm heartened to hear that your attitude wasn't unique either. That your many of your coworkers seemed to share it as well. Especially because well, as you know, I'm sure, RT closed all of their American offices. Just
Hmm.
full on, just shut down. Now, this was in response to, I think it was DirecTV, which was their channel host, cutting their contract with them, but to also shut down operations like broadly in America, like they could have maintained something. And it makes me
Oh yeah.
wonder if the reason for that is because they're getting similar pushback in a bunch of their international offices, that like all over the world, this was a line for a lot of people. Maybe they're all not leaving the way you did, but that the opposition is significant enough um, that it's led to some kind of like I guess operational instability in a lot of these foreign offices.
I mean, perhaps to some extent, I think it was just untenable for them to keep on operating. We had like the all staff meeting that I mentioned earlier, touched on this a bit. But like I do want to say, like before I go any further, like I feel like I'm sounding very conceited here, and like I this didn't take that much courage because it's not like I'm in any danger of much happening to me.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Right.
I
To clarify
lived
to
in,
chat, you're not in the Russian offices.
yeah, no, I'm not in the Russian offices.
No.
I'm in Western Europe. I'm not feeling in any physical danger. The worst that can happen to me is like issues with my NDA, but like everything I'm saying is basically public knowledge. A lot of this is already in the public record, so I'm not
Hmm.
too worried about that. Um, but yeah, like when I look at the reports of tons of Russian journalists in Russia resigning, or that woman with like giant balls going on that live broadcast with a sign behind the newsreader saying no to war and that they're lying, like that is like that's real courage. Like I get no credit for doing what we did, which was just like, okay, we're just gonna troll basically and like stand by our principles for a couple of days while we see how the situation develops, and then we make a decision on whether we stay or not, which is all we did.
Well, hold on. First of all, epic trolling is always worthy of celebration. Second of all, don't worry, I'll be talking to one of them too. Um,
Oh, awesome.
in the very near future. But no, work like this, or I guess in your case, the decision to not do work like this is incredibly important, you know? And I don't think you should be shy about being celebrated because it's one of those the banality of good. I think we talk about the banality of evil, right? Where just commonplace day-to-day interactions lead to like mass suffering if you're complacent or indifferent. But I think it goes both ways, where just being willing to care enough to make this an issue, if more people did that about more things, the world will be an unimaginably better place. Like the lack of complacency, even if it seems minimal, is cumulative. It's additive. It builds. Um, and in this respect, I mean, yeah, I hope we see more of this. Russia's obviously going to keep this line going for a long time. The insistence that this is like a peacekeeping operation and blah blah blah, denazification of Ukraine, like
Hmm.
they're not gonna back off of this. And the more people like you who are principled, the less effective their foreign operations will be, which means that in the future they might feel less confident in trying something like this again. I think the Russian government was counting on better international reception, or at least mixed international reception. Most Americans
Yeah.
don't care about what's going on in Syria, right? Like maybe they were hoping it'd be framed as like, oh, there's some disputed stuff going on, oh, the Donbass territory is oh, they both have a claim to it. This stuff happens. But instead, they've found all this opposition.
Or even diplomatically, like that vote against Russia, that was like everyone except 5 countries, including Russia, voted against Russia, or like
Three,
either abstained or
three
voted against Russia.
countries.
No, it was Russia and 4 countries, but it was
Was it?
insane. It was
Oh,
like,
I thought it was three. My
well, I
bad.
mean, if you
Got
if you
excited.
count Belarus, which doesn't really count, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was like Russia, Belarus, Syria, obviously. Um, who else was it? I know the one that was kind of surprising was Eritrea, because just no one ever thinks about them.
Um.
And
r-
there was
Uh.
another one that I forgot about.
The international condemnation was overwhelming. Wasn't North Korea one of the ones that
Oh yeah,
supported them?
it was North Korea exactly. It
Yes,
was
truly
yeah.
the international
The fact
super
that
team, you know.
yeah, even like China wasn't voting with them, and what the other thing that was crazy was when Kazakhstan refused to send troops to Ukraine. Like Russia, literally Russia had sent troops to Kazakhstan to help them with the protest like 2 months earlier.
Uh-huh.
And then when they invaded Ukraine and they asked Kazakhstan for troops, they're like, "Nope, we're staying
That was
out of
wild
this
to
one,
me
dude."
because
Insane. Yeah.
you know they have to think like they're coming for me next. Like the in Kazakhstan, like they have to when they were deliberating there, like I feel like I feel like the writing is on the wall for a lot of countries. Like, I imagine that officials in Kazakhstan have something like a unique insight into what the Russian government is facing because, of course, they have like ties, you know, at least stuff that Western diplomats might not necessarily be aware of. And their refusal to me was a hugely optimistic sign because
Yeah.
Kazakhstan knows what happens to neighboring countries that defy Russia. They have to be thinking Russia might not be able to do anything to them after this. They might have broken their back against Ukraine, and Kazakhstan might have known it, I think, before a lot of people in the West did.
Yeah. Can you imagine if Russia doesn't manage to ever actually achieve anything in Ukraine and like that, like there's no way Putin survives that politically. And the amount of damage that he's done to Russia, like politically, economically with the sanctions, like like up until then he was presented as this strong man who kind of brought Russia back from the brink after the Cold War, you know, after what was it, Yeltsin, who's not very well regarded in Russia in hindsight. Um,
Not at all, no.
and now, like, if this is Putin's legacy, he will be regarded in even worse light than any recent Russian leader, Soviet leader, whatever. It's
Hmm.
like absolutely insane the amount of damage he's done in just like 1 month when he was just considered like one of the, I'm not saying this is my opinion, but obviously, but like for people in Russia, he was considered like one of the greatest leaders in Russia's history or whatever.
Yeah, for being a strongman is really kind of it's a really easy way to get and to maintain power, and it's also a really easy way to lose it. Yeah, so it's a very easy way to lose power as well because there's not really any room for nuance or like allowances for failure to a strong man, you know. And this is going to be unambiguously the greatest failure in all of Putin's career, like bar none. Nothing else even comes close. I mean, this is worse than like Bay of Pigs, worse than occupation of Afghanistan from either us or them. I mean, this is like a because he like everything is being broken in favor of this, right? Like tens
Mhm.
of thousands of troops lost, international condemnation with almost no exceptions. It's you know, Eritrea, North Korea, like okay, you know, um, and an economy decimated. Um, and well, yeah, I don't know. I like they can't propaganda network their way out of this one. I think.
Mm. I can still hear Pigeon in the background, but it's fine.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I never hear her on stream. She sounds way more desperate than I thought.
she's just it. Her default scream pitch is so pathetic and so alarming that like every time I hear it, I assume something's wrong. But it's just how she meows. She says hello like that. She'll run up to you and stare at you for like 3 seconds, and then do that scream, and it sounds like she's dying. It's just she just sounds and looks naturally like she's miserable all the time, but she's purring and happy and rubbing her face up against you. So like whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my cats was going crazy right before I came on stream, so I fed her just to quiet her down. But yeah,
That's
I
fair.
was hoping that wouldn't happen. So yeah, anyway, we get to the Monday after the invasion starts, and we have that all staff meeting. So we had a quick meeting, just our department with our department heads before the all staff one, and it was super open, super honest. The department heads told us that they were resigning, and they said, "Look, you can resign and give in your notice, like to stay here for the full month or for however long you want. You can resign effective immediately. No one's gonna give you any shit for that. Just do whatever is best for you, you know." And that was like super open. We would all have a discussion about what was going on and why like we were leaving, and everyone was like really on the same page. And then we joined the all staff meeting, which Reuters has since written about, so this is also on the public record.
Uh-huh.
um and the all staff meeting was hosted by the two managers, the Russian ideologues who are
Oh.
in charge of the company. And that was a moment, man. That was quite something, because like they knew that there were a ton of resignations. They knew that probably the sentiment among the people who hadn't yet announced their resignation was going to be roughly on the same page as the people who had already said that they were resigning. And yet, one of the first things they said was something like first of all, they like the one of them, they were kind of doing good cop, bad cop, but one of them was like, oh, first of all, like focus on your mental health, stay safe, whatever. And then the next one, so over the weekend, while we were waiting for this meeting to know what we were going to do about our employment situation, the EU had announced sanctions against Russian media in the entire on the entire yeah in the EU basically. They said that they were going to shut down Russia's propaganda machine, or whatever they called it. And we didn't know at that point if that affected us. And so that's what they opened with. This one person was like, yeah, so I've been talking to everyone and all the journalists involved at Rupley and RT and asking why these sanctions would target us, because like never done anything that goes against journalistic ethics, and that we've broken no rules, or made no faux pas in terms of what we were supposed to do. And everyone in the call was like, what the fuck is she talking about? Like, who does she think she's talking to? This sounds like the same kind of, gaslighting denials that they would give to people outside the company. But I was really surprised that that would be the line that they would have inside the company as well. And like there was this famous quote where someone talked about the fact that we couldn't use the word invasion, and she said, "Oh yeah, but it's just a matter of linguistic subtlety. Like you can still be objective and talk and tell the story correctly without using certain words, and it's not really an issue." And
Uh-huh.
then one of the heads of the newsroom, who had already announced that she was resigning, said, "No, no, no, this is an issue. You know it's an issue because we argued about it for hours, and you can't claim that it's not something that's a major red flag." So yeah, no, it was like that meeting was a huge clusterfuck, and
So
it's also like,
I want to know something, if I may.
yeah,
So you can only tell based off vibes, but these two head folks, I mean these two managers, did they give you the impression of being deliberate dishonest propagandists, or of people who had just bought the party line just in its entirety, and they were just effortlessly regurgitating all of the talking points that have been given to them? Obviously you can't tell, but what was the impression that you got?
honestly, I'm not 100% sure there's really a distinction between the two. Not for everyone, at least. And for them, I wouldn't be able to tell if that there was that distinction there.
Okay.
Like when I hear people like Haas or Jason Hinkle or whatever his name is, like I cannot believe that they really believe what they say. Like there's no way they believe that. When I hear, I've never even read this guy's work, but like I read one quote from him in a Vice article like to this morning, basically. What's his name? Blumenthal.
Yeah,
Um,
I know that
yeah,
guy.
he was saying that the bombing of the theater that had the massive children sign next to it was a false flag by the Azov battalion. Like, there's no way he actually believes that. I mean, I don't know the guy. I can't get vibes off of him. I don't even know what he looks like or sounds like. But I have a hard time believing that any reasonable person would actually believe that.
I think there's a lot of truth to to a lack of a distinction here, because generally, people who have really bought into the propaganda of like an authoritarian government, people who are hardline supporters of that sort of thing, like let's say Nazi sympathizers, right? The difference between deliberate lying and just buying into misinformation gets really vague in a way that I think a lot of mentally well people are really uncomfortable with. By mentally well, I mean people, I guess, who are empiricists, people who believe in the idea of telling the truth and that there is such a thing as truth. But there are legitimate philosophical disciplines that reject the idea of any kind of meaningful truth, even an intersubjective one. And I feel like that attitude carries across in the propagandizing a lot of these far right governments, where empiricism is like a selectively wielded, or there's like legitimate doublethink or deliberately ingrained cognitive dissonance. And I never really know when I talk to people, like how much of it is them being deliberately dishonest and how much of it is them sincerely believing in the non-existence of empirical truth, like
Hmm.
where is that line crossed? I don't really know.
Yeah, no, like that's basically the feeling I get for a lot of these. But yeah, so basically, what the way I've described it to like colleagues after that, because every single time, like after that meeting, like people would just like come and go, what the hell was that? And I was saying that person's voice, the one who was saying talking about the linguistic subtleties, like her voice was the sound of 1,000 resignation letters being signed. Like if people were hoping for any reassurance or like reframing or kind of like, okay, we're taking a step back, we've heard your concerns and we are going to readjust how we've been covering things over the weekend. People who were hoping for that definitely got the exact opposite, and I think basically that's when they got a flood of resignation letters.
Mhm.
So yeah, uh, it took like a month for basically everyone to sort out what the best way they had of getting out of their contract was. But yeah, at this point, there's like 20% of the employees that I knew are still there for various reasons. And the people who were there, like, I can't even blame them. Like, some of them have a visa tied to Germany that, if they come from Syria, they come from Palestine, they come from Iran, like wherever. If they lose this job, they lose that visa, they have to go home. And that's
Mhm.
not an enviable position, like I'm pretty privileged in being able to resign in that sense. But yeah, it's I think there's, apart from the Moscow office, who I'm sure there are good people at the Moscow office too. Like I just do not know them personally. I can't imagine
There might
anyone
be
not feeling
slightly
conflicted
fewer
about this
over
position.
there.
Yeah, but I mean it's interesting because I used to I have a friend who is Chinese, who worked for the New York Times in Beijing, and she would tell me about, like, she went to a journalism school in China, and all of her classmates went on to work for Chinese media, and she would tell me like none of them, like she was lucky to get a job at the New York Times and to actually be able to do journalism, but all of her colleagues, she would tell me, were also like believed in journalism, and were like idealistic to a certain extent, has had, the shine a light into the darkness mentality of,
Well,
the importance of.
you work with what you can get, right? If you
Exactly.
live in China and you are interested in journalism, I mean, how many options do you have for
Yeah,
making use of what you can do?
that's the point. Yeah, that's the point. I'm sure it's the same thing in Russia. It's just, literally every media company that wanted to keep on reporting on the Ukraine war by calling it a war in Russia had to either shut down or leave the country. And so, yeah, if those are your options, like I can't fault anyone for staying in the industry and staying in the company where they can just like do the best they can in a horrible situation.
Yeah. It's likely that the Moscow office has had more propagandistic revisions than your office did. They've probably had these bubbles like inflate and pop a few times.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I wanted to mention this. Sorry for cutting you off. But like the speaking of the Moscow office, so I have a colleague who, for people who spoke, actually, you didn't even need to speak Russian. Just like during the summer, when some of the editors in the Moscow office took time off, they had a smaller staff than us at Rupley, and so it was a possibility for you to work to like fill in at the Moscow office for a few weeks during the summer. And a colleague of mine did that. And he came back and he was like, "Oh yeah, we have this illusion here in Berlin that RT and Rupley are like completely separate animals and like two different beasts entirely. But you go to Moscow and that illusion just shatters completely because there it's literally the same organization. It's the same people working for both sides of the content. Yeah, and so that was kind of another moment of, oh shit, well, I'm glad there's that separation here, but he was basically telling me that what he saw in Moscow convinced him that even in Berlin there was no separation either. I didn't have that firsthand Moscow experience, so I didn't get the same like illusion shattering moment as he did, but it was kind of a bit of an eye opener still to know that.
gotcha. All right, well that does make sense. Um, damn. Well, I guess I want to know then, since I'm invested in the character arc now. What are your upcoming plans? Have you found any another journalistic post to take since then?
Um, Not yet. At the moment, I'm working on all the unemployment stuff. Hopefully to get that sorted as soon as possible. Um, Basically, just for like, I'm really, really bad at selling myself. So I'm hoping to be able to freelance just because it should be faster to find freelance gigs than to find another like good staff position. And I'm hoping to be able to find freelance gigs so that I can wait longer before I can find something that I like better. Um, but yeah, I would like to get to a position where I can actually like not worry about paying my bills while freelancing. But I know that freelancers dedicate a lot of their time to like pitching and like trying to sell stories, and oh, this news company didn't buy it, so I have to approach these other people until someone says, okay, we'll buy it for this much, and then try to make the finances work. Like it's a lot of work for individual people, so it's kind of daunting. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to get at least some income that way until I can manage to find another either staff position or yeah, let's see what happens.
I hope
I've
so too.
considered I would like to have like the kind of editorial independence that streamers and YouTubers have, but I hate being the center of attention. So
W
I'd rather be behind the camera.
Listen, maybe don't have this level of journalistic independence. People can say whatever the fuck they want in this platform and get away with it. Maybe
Yeah.
slightly less independence would be good for your profession. Honest to God, if I were you, I would really like play up the I would really play up the like the angle of what you've talked to me about here, you know? Like I worked for an RT subsidiary, and when their invasion of Ukraine took place, I was so disgusted that we changed the words behind the scenes, and then I quit, that kind of thing. I feel like there's probably going to be a at least in the field of journalism, there's going to be kind of a reckoning with RT and RT subsidiaries following all of this, like maybe a little bit more when the dust settles, if it's not happening already. And people are going to be looking for standout narratives like that to contrast against the other narrative, which will be all the people who played along and went with it because they didn't care. And it's probably better to be on the former than the latter side in terms of public perception.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard both sides of this. I've heard like people saying when asked if they were to hire people who resigned from Rupley or from Russian media, and they would say, yeah, like it does make you think about it, and you do like have a moment of pause, but yeah, at the same time you understand that they didn't have a choice of where they could work, and so you would at least hear them out. And then I hear other people who like say basically like, no way, I would never touch anyone who worked there. And like these are people in hiring positions. I have a colleague who a former colleague of theirs ended up working at a pretty big news company in France, and they approached their colleagues saying, "Oh, you're like at a high position now at this awesome company. Like I'd like to work there. Do you have anything open for me?" And they were apparently like pretty close colleagues before that. And that person replied saying, "You," and this was 2 years ago, pre any of before any of this. It was just like the stigma of Russian media. The person said, "I would not touch you with a 10-foot pole after working for Russian media, and no one in France is going to hire you." Which is, yeah, that's kind of disheartening, and also, um, what was I going to say?
Keep in mind, though, those people are going to go after you one way or another, right? I mean, when they
Mhm.
ask you for journalistic experience, you're not going to leave out the 4 years that you had a staff position. That's going to come
Yeah,
with
of
you no
course.
matter what. As long as you have that in your past, I think that contrasting that against your opposition to the invasion narrative is probably the best way to move forward. You know, better than
Possibly, yeah.
yeah, better than underplaying the entire thing and them looking in your past and going like, "Oh, up until early 2022, worked with." You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, and
Best to
like
own it.
the funny thing is that the same companies who say, "Oh, I would never hire you after this. I'm not even going to give you an interview," are companies who bought our footage on a weekly basis, you know.
Virtue signaling. It's virtue
Yeah.
signaling. Yeah.
So that was funny. But it's like the one good thing that I can say that I really got, like, first of all, the colleagues that I worked with were incredible people. And also, like, before I got this job, I was applying to a bunch of jobs that were saying, "Oh, you need extensive newsroom experience. You need to like know how to work with broadcast equipment." And I had been working in journalism for a few years at that point, but it was always like small, like single office, like, 10 people, 20 people operations. It was always like, you bring your own equipment and you figure it out on the spot, you know. And the fact that I worked for Russian media might have some downside in terms of my employability to some people, but at the same time, there are like real transferable skills that I learned working there that I think will probably hopefully make it worth it in the long run.
Well, I think so too. And if nothing else, you have an interesting story for it. We're
Yeah,
um
yeah,
we're coming up on 2 hours, which is a fairly hefty conversation.
yeah.
I want you to know I really do appreciate you coming on to speak with me. It's actually been very revealing and gives me some perspective, uh, not just into the broader situation, but also I guess the fragility of Russia's position um, internationally when it comes to their propaganda network.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, man. I like it. It took you a couple of weeks to reply to my email, so I was worried that, because I also talked to, like, sent an email to someone else, not a streamer, but like another journalist, like saying, "Oh, this," like someone that I'd been talking to, like, on and off for a while, and just like sent a long rambling email about what had gone down, and never got a reply. And I think that I should probably like not contact them again, because that email was way too rambling. But yeah, I was glad to get a reply from you, and
In my
you had some
case, I'm just bad at keeping up with my emails. Also, I have a bad habit of replying to the emails I care about last because I have to craft a real response rather than one of the template responses that I have because I get enough emails that if I manually typed out every response, I wouldn't have time to stream. But I still read all my emails, so like I don't have a secretary. Most people at my size do. But anyway, so I see a real email like yours that I have to respond to actually. And then I put it in a different bin, like a separate folder with a tag, and I'm like, okay, we'll just clear out the junk emails. Not junk, but like, some of them are junk, but a lot of them are just like, hello, I love you, thanks. And I go, thanks, and then I never actually get around to the real ones. So yeah, I'm trying my best.
you also had a lot of shit going on for the last few weeks, maybe.
Well, that too. Um,
What? Yeah, what was there was one thing that I wanted to bounce on, and that, yeah, it doesn't matter. Never mind. Sorry. I'll let you conclude this.
No, not at all. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to keep in touch in the future. Be interested in seeing if there's any follow through. to your benefit and to mine, it might be good to keep in contact with your former coworkers. I imagine you're in a sort of shared situation
Oh
there.
yeah, definitely. I think we've probably interacted more since we resigned than any like all interactions outside of the office combined of the past 3 years, especially because most of them, like many of them, had been hired during COVID, so it had been a home office situation. So it's been funny to like hang out with these people face to face more in the last month than we had in the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, good. Some camaraderie in difficult
Oh
times.
yeah, definitely,
Um,
definitely.
is there anything that you'd like to shout out, like any ventures or profiles, or are you contributing your voice and not else?
I didn't think of anything ahead of time, so I'm kind of on the spot here. I can't think of anything specific, no.
That's fine. Email me
But
in the
yeah,
near future if you have anything you can think of, and I'll have my editors
sure.
add it to the description of the video.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for having me, man.
Thanks a lot for coming on. Seriously, thank you.
Cool.
Be well.
You too.
Well, that was dope. I feel like that was a real conversation. Sorry, Marcy. I take a sick, perverted pleasure in responding to all my own emails. Um, yeah, that was super, super insightful. Um, I feel like, I feel like it's good to have convos like that, or to get some insight into stuff like that, because it lets you reflect a little bit on the mentality of organizations that do bad things, which he undeniably participated in. You know, um, I'm always sympathetic to people who work at orgs like that, because I know that, especially in the modern economy, like so often it's like, um, you're like two paychecks missed away from losing your apartment. Yeah. But it's interesting. The fact that so many people resigned all at once is actually really heartening. It makes me feel like it makes me feel like, I don't know. I have a lot of respect for journalism as a field. I really wish that investigative journalism was more common these days. It's not. It feels like journalism is all like republishing press releases put out by other organizations, repeating stuff given by higher offices, or like opinion, like op-eds that are not even journalism, but basically just blog posts with the perceived integrity of news, Um, but yeah, it's good to know more about that. I have a lot of respect for it as a field, and knowing there are people who care enough to quit under those circumstances is very heartening.